In the spring of 1999, under the blinding New Mexico sun, a woman stumbled down a dusty road. Her wrists were raw from metal cuffs. A heavy chain dragged from her ankles. She was barefoot, half-dressed, and barely able to stand. Every step looked like it might be her last. A driver spotted her, slowed, and then froze. Something about this woman seemed almost unreal, as though she had stepped straight out of a nightmare. When she climbed into the truck, her voice shook as she begged for help. The woman claimed she had been held captive for days inside a strange trailer. She spoke of ropes, chains, and tools she couldn't even describe. Her story sounded like something from a horror film, too disturbing to believe. But as investigators listened, they noticed details that felt too precise to be a product of shock or imagination. She described a man's calm voice, playing from a tape recorder, telling her exactly what was about to happen. She remembered the smell of oil and metal, the feeling of cold restraints against her skin. She even described the inside of the trailer down to the color of its walls. The officers were left torn between disbelief and dread. Could there really be such a place, a secret torture chamber hidden in plain sight? The woman's escape was just the beginning. What she revealed would drag detectives into one of the darkest cases they had ever faced. A case that would uncover a chamber so terrifying, it earned a name whispered in fear, the Toy Box. And before long, authorities would learn she wasn't the only one. Others had been there. Many didn't survive. When a woman's words were written into the official police report, officers had one overwhelming question. Was there proof? Or had trauma shaped her story into something too extreme to be real? The answer came quickly. Investigators drove to a quiet property on the outskirts of Elephant Butte, New Mexico, a barren desert town where trailers, small houses, and stretches of nothing seemed to blend into the horizon. There, behind a tall chain-link fence, sat a white cargo trailer. To anyone passing by, it looked ordinary. But as officers stepped inside, the air seemed to change. What they saw turned disbelief into shock. The trailer was no ordinary storage unit. Chains hung from the ceiling. A hospital-style bed sat in the center, surrounded by straps and restraints. Wooden contraptions lined the walls, designed to hold a person completely still. Next to them lay surgical tools, clamps, ropes, and whips, carefully arranged, as if waiting for use. There were also strange objects that seemed homemade, devices crafted out of wood, metal, and leather, shaped into tools of control and suffering. Some were labeled, others left for the imagination. Then came the most chilling discovery, a cassette tape. Officers slid it into a player, and what they heard froze them in place. A calm male voice filled the trailer. He spoke slowly, methodically, as if reading for prepared script. He welcomed whoever was listening, describing in detail what was about to happen to them. The message wasn't for investigators. It was for victims. This recording confirmed what the woman had described. She hadn't been exaggerating. She hadn't invented the nightmare. The nightmare was real. What stunned detectives most wasn't only the trailer itself, but the planning behind it. Someone had spent years building this chamber, piece by piece. Someone had turned an ordinary trailer into a personal prison. And that someone was still free. The recording found in the trailer wasn't a random piece of evidence. It was a message crafted with purpose. Detectives replayed it again and again, listening carefully. The voice was unsettling in its calmness. This was no frantic kidnapper, no enraged attacker. The man on the tape spoke with confidence, as though he had done this many times before. He welcomed the victim as if she were entering a routine, explaining what would happen, how she would be restrained, and even warning her not to resist. There was no rush in his words, no uncertainty. This wasn't improvised, it was scripted. Every sentence sounded like it had been rehearsed. Investigators realized they weren't just dealing with a criminal. They were dealing with someone who had studied control, someone who needed victims to understand that they were no longer in charge of their own lives. Forensic experts examined the tape itself. It was old, worn from use, and yet carefully preserved. That meant whoever recorded it wanted to use it over and over, a chilling reminder that this wasn't for one victim. It was part of a pattern. As investigators discussed the recording, questions began to build. Who had this level of patience and planning? Who could create such a place, record such a tape, and still blend into daily life unnoticed? They looked back at the trailer, at the tools and devices carefully placed on shelves, each one serving a specific purpose. This was not chaos, it was order. Whoever built it had skills, maybe even professional knowledge. But the strangest detail wasn't the tools or the tape. It was the sense that the voice wanted to be heard. The man didn't just trap his victims physically. He wanted his words to echo in their minds, stripping them of hope before anything had even begun. Detectives now had evidence of a predator who planned meticulously, spoke deliberately, and struck fear not with volume, but with precision. But the voice on the tape didn't give away its name. Not yet. As the investigation deepened, detectives faced a troubling question. If one victim had been found alive, how many others had not? They began combing through old files, missing persons reports, unsolved disappearances, and unexplained deaths. A troubling pattern started to emerge. Young women, often in their 20s or 30s, vanishing near highways or small towns. Many were last seen accepting a ride, walking alone, or simply leaving work late at night. Some were never seen again. The similarities were chilling. Most of these women didn't fit the profile of someone who would just vanish voluntarily. They had families waiting for them, jobs, routines. Yet their cases had gone cold, filed away under the endless stacks of unsolved. The trailer provided new connections. Investigators discovered items that didn't belong to the rescued victim. Rings, shoes, scraps of clothing. Personal belongings with no names attached, but each one carrying the weight of a possible story cut short. Who had owned them? Where were they now? Forensic teams worked tirelessly, photographing every inch of the trailer, tagging and bagging every object. Some pieces of evidence matched descriptions in old missing person reports. Others seemed to appear out of nowhere, belonging to women who hadn't even been reported missing. The hardest part was that no two cases were identical. Some women had disappeared months apart, others years. The timeline stretched back further than anyone expected, making investigators wonder just how long this predator had been active. As detectives compared the files, one unsettling realization began to take hold. This was not random. The disappearances stretched across states, weaving a hidden thread of terror on America's highways. And still, the voice on the tape lingered in their minds, mocking, confident, and unhurried. Whoever he was, he had been hunting for a very long time. The question now was simple but terrifying. How many more were out there, still waiting to be found? When investigators laid all the cases side by side, something chilling appeared. On a large board inside the task force's office, pins marked each disappearance and each recovery site. At first, the dots seemed scattered across the map. Arizona, New Mexico, Texas, Colorado. But the longer they studied it, the more a dark pattern emerged. Nearly every point was near a stretch of highway, often the same major routes that carried truckers and travelers across the desert. These weren't random vanishings. They were connected by roads, by a predator who seemed to know the highways better than anyone else. Detectives marked the dates. Some cases were years apart, others only months. A disturbing rhythm took shape. Whenever police presence grew heavier in one area, the disappearances would shift to another state, as though the killer was watching, adapting, always staying one step ahead. For the first time, investigators began to see the scale of the threat. This wasn't a local crime or a single bad night. This was movement across borders, a shadow following the interstates. Even more unsettling were the reports that began trickling in from other jurisdictions. Officers in small towns spoke of women found near truck stops, or cases of hitchhikers who never made it home. Some of the descriptions matched the belongings pulled from the trailer. Others seemed eerily close in method, silent vanishings, bodies near rivers or ditches, the same marks of control and restraint. The picture that formed was terrifying. Whoever this man was, he wasn't bound to one city or even one state. He carried his crimes with him, hidden inside a traveling cage on wheels. The highways had become hunting grounds, stretching endlessly under the desert sky. And somewhere out there, a killer was still moving, free, and confident that no one could stop him. The map didn't just show past crimes. It hinted at what was still to come. When officers combed through the trailer, they stumbled on something unusual. Old cassette tapes, stacked neatly, some worn with age, others almost new. At first glance, they looked ordinary, like forgotten music collections. But when investigators pressed play, they realized these were not songs. What poured from the speakers was a chilling voice, slow, deliberate, and oddly methodical. It wasn't the sound of someone panicking or improvising. It was rehearsed. The man on the tape spoke with authority, as though delivering instructions to someone forced to listen. But what disturbed detectives most wasn't just the words. It was the intent behind them. The voice explained rules, punishments, and expectations in a tone so detached it seemed almost businesslike. There was no anger, no emotion, just control. The more tapes they played, the more unsettling the discovery became. Some were long, stretching for hours, filled with instructions and warnings. Others were brief, but even in their shortness, they painted a picture of someone who had carefully thought through every scenario. The officers sat in silence, listening, realizing they weren't hearing a one-time crime. They were hearing a system, a process, something repeated again and again. Each tape was like a window into a private world no one was meant to enter, a world built on fear and obedience. The recordings gave the first real clue into the mind of the person they were dealing with. He wasn't reckless. He wasn't chaotic. He was deliberate. And the question pressed harder than ever. How many people have been forced to hear these tapes before law enforcement did? For investigators, one thing became clear. The trailer wasn't just a crime scene. It was a stage, and the tapes were the script. For investigators, one chilling thought grew stronger with every piece of evidence. This man had not acted alone. The trailer was heavy, reinforced, and full of equipment that would be nearly impossible for one person to manage in secret for so many years. Survivors, too, hinted at hearing other voices, sometimes a woman's laugh, other times footsteps moving outside the room. These accounts painted the picture of a nightmare shared by more than one set of hands. Soon, suspicion turned toward those closest to him. His partner was the first to draw scrutiny. Neighbors recalled seeing her near the trailer, calm and unconcerned, as if nothing unusual was happening inside. Some survivors claimed she played an active role, helping to restrain or even taunt them. The possibility of betrayal from someone who should have offered safety added another layer of horror. Then there was his daughter. Investigators considered whether she, too, had been caught in his web, an unwilling participant, a manipulated accomplice, or something darker. Reports surfaced of her being present during certain encounters. But how much was choice, and how much was coercion? That question still lingers, and it unsettled even hardened detectives. Theories spread further. Did friends know? Were there others who shared his twisted obsessions and visited the trailer? Some suggested a small circle of like-minded accomplices, people who vanished from the investigation as quickly as they appeared. But without hard evidence, these possibilities remained haunting shadows. The case that started with one terrifying escape was no longer just about a single predator. It was about an entire network of silence, family ties, loyalty, fear, that allowed the trailer's secrets to stay buried for so long. And with each unanswered question, investigators realized the truth might be even darker than they first imagined. Long after the trailer was emptied, the most haunting questions were not about the devices or the accomplices. They were about the people who never walked away. Survivors told investigators they had seen others inside, faces they remembered only in fragments. Some described muffled cries. Others spoke of shadows lying still in the corner. A few recalled conversations with victims who later disappeared without a trace. These accounts suggested that for every escapee, there may have been many more who never left the trailer alive. But who were they? Without bodies, there were no identities. Without names, there were no official records. The desert surrounding the man's home stretched for miles, quiet, desolate, and perfect for hiding secrets. Search teams scoured the sands, digging and probing, but they found almost nothing. It was as if the desert itself had swallowed the evidence. The recordings hinted at numbers far greater than the confirmed cases. He spoke on those tapes with a casual tone, as though addressing countless victims. His words suggested this had been happening for decades, each encounter rehearsed, repeated, perfected. Yet the tapes gave no names, only cruel instructions and chilling laughter. Families with missing loved ones across the country began to wonder, could their son, their sister, their mother have ended up in that trailer? Letters poured into police stations. Some families begged for answers, others demanded DNA testing. But the evidence was too thin, the trail too cold. And so, the greatest horror of all remained unresolved. We may never know how many lives ended inside that steel box, or who they truly were. The silence of those missing victims is louder than any confession. They are the voices lost in the desert winds, unnamed, uncounted, but never forgotten. Gathering evidence was only the beginning. The physical traces inside the trailer were terrifying, but they were not enough to secure convictions. Investigators faced a daunting challenge. Without bodies, many of the charges rested on circumstantial evidence, survivor testimony, and fragments of forensic proof. Detectives meticulously documented every item, every chain, every tape, knowing that these pieces could be the difference between justice and freedom for a predator. The cassettes were transcribed, timestamps matched to equipment, and patterns were analyzed. Each recording told a story, revealing his methods, his rituals, his obsession with control. Lawyers and prosecutors joined the effort, debating strategy. Could the evidence of tools and recordings, combined with survivor statements, outweigh the absence of corpses? Could they paint a picture clear enough for a jury to see the depth of the horror without ever witnessing it firsthand? Investigators spent long nights cross-referencing old missing persons reports with the items in the trailer. Every name added weight. Every unclaimed item added frustration. The legal puzzle was painstaking, and time was not on their side. The longer the case dragged, the more the man's shadow seemed to stretch, hiding secrets that might never be uncovered. In the end, the case became a delicate balance, assembling fragments of suffering into a coherent story, proving beyond doubt the nightmare that had taken place. The question remained, could the system catch up to the scale of his crimes before another trail went cold? The arrest was quiet, almost mundane. No dramatic chase, no shouting, just officers approaching a house, carefully, methodically. Inside, the man was calm, collected, as if he had been expecting them all along. There was no resistance, only an eerie stillness, a predator confronted by the law he had long evaded. During the trial, the calmness remained. Prosecutors presented survivor testimony, photographs, and a meticulously cataloged evidence from the trailer. Defense attorneys argued gaps, inconsistencies, the absence of bodies. The courtroom became a stage where horror met strategy. The man's demeanor unsettled everyone. He listened without flinching, occasionally offering a faint, polite smile. Yet beneath that composure was a mind that had rehearsed decades of control, anticipating scrutiny, calculating every reaction. Survivors faced him across the courtroom, their courage tested by memory, fear, and trauma. Families of the missing clung to hope that this trial would bring answers, that justice might finally touch those whose lives had been stolen. But the trial was complicated, tense, and slow-moving, a battle not just of law, but of memory, evidence, and the human need for closure. Then, before the trial could reach its conclusion, the case ended abruptly. The man died, cause officially natural, though the timing felt almost unreal. Investigators, survivors, and families were left stunned. Years of meticulous work, years of facing unimaginable truths, now hung in uncertainty. Reactions were mixed: relief, grief, frustration. For survivors, there was no catharsis, only the echo of memory and unanswered questions. Investigators felt the sting of unfinished justice, a legal system unable to fully account for a predator who had eluded accountability in life and now in death. The public, too, was shaken. Media coverage filled airwaves, but facts alone could not convey the horror of what had been uncovered. And for those who had survived, the absence of closure was a wound that would not heal. Even decades later, questions remain. How many women were lost? Who truly helped them? Were there secrets the desert and the trailer never revealed? Investigators continue to pore over evidence, some still unresolved, some new leads appearing occasionally, as though the case itself refuses to die. Families still hope for answers. The tapes, the tools, the fragments of lives cataloged and left behind. These are reminders that not all darkness is ever fully illuminated. The toy box is more than a crime scene. It is a legacy of fear, control, and unanswered questions. The desert winds carry the whispers of those who vanished, nameless, uncounted, yet never forgotten. And the story lingers, haunting, a chilling testament to the lengths one person went to dominate lives, and the enduring mystery of how many suffered unseen, unheard, and unknown.